Darren, this is interesting because, of course, the Speaker normally holds his counsel on political matters, though I guess you could argue this is a constitutional issue for the Speaker.
Yeah, indeed, and would have, of course, a big impact on the House of Commons if Labour's plan was to go through. And in many ways, Lindsay Hoyle is the custodian, isn't he, of the House of Commons. Now, this all relates to Labour's announcement. Gordon Brown, remember him, the former Prime Minister, and Keir Starmer were in Leeds a little earlier on this month. In fact, I was there as well when they made this manifesto commitment, if you like, to a degree, though Labour say that they are going to look at where the commitment really lies on abolishing the second chamber, the unelected House of Lords. Their argument is it's got too big. There are essentially 800 members. It's the second largest legislative body in the world after the Chinese People's Congress, that it's been used in effect as a form of cronyism in the past by various governments, and that it should effectively be abolished. Now, not the chamber itself, but rather the idea of it being unelected. They want to see a wholly elected second chamber. Now, Lindsay Hoyle's problem with all of this is he says, well, that creates big problems constitutionally, Mark, if you like, because at the moment we've got the lower house, which is the House of Commons, which is actually obviously in charge of all parliamentary business to a large degree, and you've got the revising chamber, the upper chamber, the House of Lords, and that's how our constitution functions. If you have an elected second chamber, that could change the balance and indeed change our constitutional makeup. This is what he had to say on the radio. He said what we've seen is that the second chamber has been very, very useful. It's been redefining the business, getting bills tidied up, sending them back in good order. I don't believe and I don't think we should have a second house that's elected. I don't want competition. Who's got supremacy? And that gets to the heart of this big political argument, is if you've got a second elected chamber, could they then start challenging the supremacy, if you like, of the House of Commons? And if that was the case, we'd have to have an entirely different constitutional arrangement. Why this is all terribly complicated is because, as I say, Labour, they haven't fully committed to it, but essentially have committed themselves to doing this in the first term of a Labour government. Lindsay Hoyle, who was a Labour MP, now sits as an independent because he's a Speaker, but he wants to remain Speaker in a second term. And so what you could see is a bit of a battle in Parliament behind me if Lindsay Hoyle is still Speaker of the Commons, not wanting to see this happen, and a Labour government in Downing Street wanting to see it through.
We reflect that these plans are not new, all the arguments well rehearsed, and a certain Gordon Brown helping Sir Keir Starmer actually put them into play. So it's a little bit of history as well in terms of Westminster. But let's just reflect on more urgent matters today. We've had a COBRA meeting, we understand. There has been the observation made that the Prime Minister has not been attending these COBRA meetings to deal with the issue of all the industrial action. Do we know what's happened this morning?
Yeah, I think in many regards what the Prime Minister is trying to do here, at least from his point of view, is he doesn't want to wade into this too much. The government's got a stated position on all of this, which is that it is up to the independent pay review bodies to set out what the pay arrangement should be in these individual sectors. I heard earlier on Alice Porter, I think, speak to one trade unionist who was also making it terribly clear that at the end of the day, you know, there are lots of different unions involved in all of this. They've all got very different demands. Some of them have made very specific demands about how much money they want to see in terms of a pay rise. Others have not set out specific tasks. So the Prime Minister doesn't want to wade into all of this in that regard, and the government have clearly made it very clear they don't want to talk about pay. Where there is concern is clearly about these contingency plans that are in place, most notably for what's happening today with paramedics on strike, and indeed when it comes to the borders this weekend and over the new year, where the army do have a role. But I think ultimately what the Prime Minister is trying to do is put a bit of distance in some ways between the immediacy of all of this and his stated position, because there is real problems for the government, I would suggest, in that when you look at many of these strikes, actually public opinion is squarely behind the unions taking the action, and they're blaming the government, public opinion is, and that could get quite tricky for the government. But many feel, and you hear this from the trade union leaders, don't you, Mark, that they feel this is a dereliction of duty to a degree. I think one trade union said it was the greatest abdication of leadership that he had seen in 25 years because the Prime Minister is not getting involved. At the moment, though, as I say, he's taking a back seat and leaving it very much up to individual cabinet ministers to lead all of this.